as a fan who watched all their content but doesn't anymore, they still have their hooks in me to some extent. Like I still see all their content on YouTube. You know, I interact with their stuff on Instagram. I wear their t-shirt. I'm still a part of their brand. If they came and they did an event in Boise, I would go. Even though I'm not an active viewer. And I think that maybe just on the creator side, like it's good to remember like people are participating with your brand in a lot of levels. You know, sometimes it's like watch every video, buy the t-shirt, get the stickers, you know, whatever. And sometimes it's not, but that doesn't mean that they're not there. You know, a lot of times when we think of our audience on YouTube, we're thinking about the diehards, right? The people who are just there all the time in our comments, you know, the second our video releases. That makes up the smallest portion of our audience. There are a lot of people in the audience who are probably participating in your brand like I am participating, or maybe even less than what I did with the Mats Off-Road. Now I'm watching 1 out of 7 videos, you know, or 1 out of 10 videos. That's probably pretty normal for people. Most people may go through a time where they watch all your stuff, but then they might not. And I think that's okay.
Welcome back to Creative Rouse Podcast. Let's get right to it. Nathan, what are some of your favorite creators?
Wow. This is a hard question. We talked a little bit about it before we hit record here. And I have had a lot of favorite creators over time. What I'm watching right now, I guess, Iced Coffee Hour.
Oh, yeah.
Graham Stephan, Jack Selby. Love that podcast. We just talked about an episode that we had both happened to watch. And I was just like enthralled. It was such a good episode. It was like a 4.5 hour episode, and it felt so short. It just felt so good to me.
Such a weird coincidence. You mentioned that one, and I had just been listening to it like 2 days ago.
Yeah.
The funny thing about Graham Stephan is I really like Iced Coffee Hour. I'm not a huge fan of like his main YouTube channel.
Yeah, I would have to agree.
Really?
Funny enough.
Oh, funny.
I think that his main YouTube channel, and no hate, but it's just kind of boring.
Yeah, it's not something I watch.
Repetitive, and a lot of it's like finance news again, which I'm pretty into finance, but finance news not so much. So yeah, I definitely don't watch all of his main channel videos, but I'm pretty much watching every episode on the Iced Coffee Hour.
I find it interesting that a lot of times on the Iced Coffee Hour, the episodes don't really seem that closely related to finance. And strategy wise, I kind of wonder what he's thinking there of just if he gets this broad enough appeal podcast that more people will watch his main channel, or does he not care? I don't know. What do you think is?
I don't think he cares.
Yeah.
I actually listened to a podcast where Graham was being interviewed, and he talked about just kind of the, I don't know, what do you call it? The lifespan of his main channels. He has a couple other main channels, and he talked about how when, he started as a creator, he was doing real estate. He was just working tons and tons of hours, and he got up to publishing like multiple videos a week on multiple channels, and was just working like crazy, and kind of got burned out, I think, over like 2021, maybe 2022. And it's just wanted to slow down a little bit on his main channels. I think the Iced Coffee Hour, which he is, I think, co-owns like 50-50-ish with his co-host, Jack. They own it together, and I think that they get to travel more to go visit other, guests and stuff. So I feel like what he said on the podcast is that it just feels less like work.
Yeah.
And so I think he's really slowed down his production on his main channels, and is just really focusing in on this podcast, because it is very much more broad, like the types of guests that they're getting, they're very wide and varied, and it sounds like they're making a lot of money. It sounds like it took a while. They used to do this thing where on every episode they'd ask the guest, they'd say, guess how much we've earned in AdSense. And they stopped doing that around like, I think $300,000. But anyway, I think that it's going well for them, and I think that he just enjoys it a lot more.
Yeah, I agree with that. Podcasting feels less like work than a lot of other content creation, because I don't know. It's like it's agreed upon that you are just going to analyze something and have a discussion, and it's not all about like what sound effect is going to hold retention here.
Right. I think one reason why I really like the Iced Coffee Hour, and I listen to a wide variety of podcasts, I am very interested, I think, in people. We've had this discussion a lot about like what you look for in a podcast versus what I often look for in a podcast.
Different.
And it's very, very different. And I've thought a lot about it. And one thing that I've realized is I'm very interested in people. I love hearing people's stories. I love like just digging into their background, seeing what makes them them. And I feel like on the Iced Coffee Hour, a lot of times, and other podcasts where you just interview guests about themselves and their background and their history, you get a lot more of that than you do in traditional YouTube or media, really. As I was thinking about this, I even thought back to like when I was younger, when I would like check out books from the library, and I would check out biographies, like autobiographies. And as like a 7-year-old, that's a little weird, right? But I remember like checking out biographies like Benjamin Franklin or Amelia Earhart. Like those were the types of books that were just so intriguing to me. And so I think I get that with podcasts. And this one episode that we had both happened to watch, it was on a guy named Matthew Cox, really interesting guy. And I listened to the Iced Coffee Hour episode and I was just intrigued. And now I've watched like 4 of his other podcast episodes where he's been interviewed, just so that I can like dig in. Yes, I get super obsessed about these people and I just want to find out why and, learn about them.
Yeah, I think when I get obsessive, it's much more about a topic. It might be like persuasion. Okay, so this con artist is really good at persuasion, so I'm going to listen to 5 other podcasts about persuasion where you get really, really focused on the individual. And I think that's what makes you such a good interviewer. When I've seen you do podcast interviews, you ask these questions that the interviewee will laugh and be like, no one's ever asked me that before, because you know so much of the detail that you can kind of, I think, pick out those things that are less well known about them, not just the standard questions they get asked all the time. It's like you notice some obscure thing from 3 years ago and you're like, how did whatever happened with this? And they forgot they even said it, but they're kind of
those are the things that like pique my curiosity. When I'll hear someone say something or I read something about somebody, I'm like, I wonder, like just these minute details. Something that's not really probably that important, but something that is interesting to me. So that's one Iced Coffee Hour. What about you? What's something you're watching these days?
I like Diary of a CEO a lot.
Oh yeah,
I like the way he cuts up the interviews, and it doesn't appear that way. But if you're paying attention, I'm sure that he cuts them up a lot. It's not just this casual conversation, which it's presented that way. I know that he's trying to give you that feel that it's kind of like unedited, but it is. Yeah. I can tell he's pulling out the juiciest, best moments, and I appreciate that efficiency.
Yeah.
I have found that with his podcast, and this is something I've tried to kind of emulate, is he will ask people questions and he's not afraid to ask a follow-up question. For example, he was doing this one interview with, I can't remember her name, Dr. something. She's a doctor. And it was really interesting. She was talking about like how something, because of most people's mothers would hold them with their right arm. And if you look into somebody's like left eye with your right eye, that's like a way to connect to people. Really weird, right? Obscure. But he said, well, how do you do that? Which was what was on my mind too. But I know that, prior to noticing this, I would not have done that. I would have thought, well, I don't want to make it awkward or like be too challenging, Right. But that's what he was wondering. And that's exactly what I was wondering. And I bet that's exactly what a lot of people were wondering. So he's like, how do you do that? And she didn't even have a good answer. So it was kind of awkward. He's just not afraid to like ask the questions that everybody's thinking, or maybe some hard questions that people aren't thinking yet.
Right.
Yeah, he just gets the very best, juiciest parts. Sometimes I think the packaging's a little overhyped. Okay. Like I've noticed on some of the podcasts, they'll say something like dishes are the biggest reason couples like, I don't know how they phrased it, but everyone's like, oh, everyone thinks it's money or this or this. It's dishes. Well, maybe that's the most frequent. I don't think that's like the biggest reason for divorce, right? Things like that, where they're just a little bit like, you kind of took this further, or, this is a life or death decision because technically you could die from this thing. Like, yes, but it's very unlikely. Like, yes, okay, the choosing which car I buy is maybe a life or death decision, but is it really? I don't know. So things like that. But overall, I love that one.
Oh, very cool. Okay, what about in the creator space? One for me that I've been really into lately is Colin and Samir.
Yeah,
they are so good. And they've been around for a while. And I've kind of dabbled in their content here and there, but I really like their brand. It's not even just their content, just their overall brand. I just really, really like.
What is it about their brand that you like so much?
I don't know. It's like, I love their dynamic. I think their dynamic is great. I think they both as I've watched some of their content, there's definitely some, draw for one thing for one versus another. I also really just feel like their brand feels very positive, and honestly, overall, I don't really know. Like, I get their newsletters. I think they send out like 3 newsletters a week. I read all of them.
Wow.
I don't know. Like, you watch them too, and maybe you have an idea of what it is for
exactly,
you, but I don't know. I don't know exactly what it is, but it's just like, it just feels so positive and uplifting and hopeful. And like, as I interview different people and talk about the creator economy, it just makes me feel excited for YouTube and what's going forward and in the creator economy.
Yeah. I don't know how much this is a brand thing, but one thing I like about them is they find a really good balance, I think, between like high level things and really practical tips. Or tips is maybe even the wrong word, but they're able to kind of be all over that spectrum of like, this is the really high level kind of what's going on, speculative, and then this is the really like down to earth kind of things that they're currently trying to do or doing. And it seems like they don't hold much back, which is nice. That you never know for sure. But yeah, I like that about them a lot. Ooh, let's see. What other content creators? Ed from Film Booth. I like him a lot. It's starting to feel a little repetitive. I don't know if it's just the format kind of that feels repetitive, where the content is probably perfectly unique. Honestly, Daryl Eves, I know it's a weird one. His channel is so small, but I appreciate anytime he's talking about things. He's just amazing.
Yeah.
He knows his stuff. I'm surprised his channel is as small as it is. Like, I'm surprised he hasn't pursued that more. I know that's not his thing, but why isn't it his thing?
Yeah, I don't know. He does have I would say his channel's inactive. It is fairly small channel-wise, but it's also just fairly inactive. Like, he doesn't really post regularly. He does live streams. He has a lot of very high-profile clients, and I think that's probably why. Like, people kind of hear about him and know, okay, if you're working with Daryl, you're doing, you're potentially going to have a lot of success, or you've had a lot of success. So maybe he just doesn't need it as much. Yeah,
and it probably does feel more exclusive if he doesn't. If he puts everything for free, then what is this benefit that the people working on him one-on-one are getting? Yeah,
but I do think Daryl's a great one. I wanted to go back to something you said, talking about one of the channels you were listening to, Creator Film Booth, sorry.
Yep.
You said it, I think, feels a little old or feels a little stale. I want to talk about that a little bit, because I feel like I go through these waves of watching a channel for sometimes a couple weeks, maybe even less, but then sometimes like a year or 2 years. Like, I'll have these, the runs with different channels, like where I'll be just super engaged with their content, and then I just kind of fall off. And I don't know why, but I wonder, like you said, maybe it's not that the content isn't unique, but maybe it's just that you've watched long enough where it just feels like you've heard what's being said before. Do you feel like that happens for you? And like, what does that look like for you?
For me, I think it looks more like just becoming gradually more selective about which video or podcast episode I click on, where maybe for a while it's every single one. I'm so into them. I don't care what the topic is, I'm listening. And then slowly it's like, maybe I'll skip that one. Yeah. But I still usually keep an eye on my favorites pretty well. I do think a lot of it, at least for me, is I will look at a thumbnail or even a title of a podcast from a creator I know, and the first thing that goes through my head is, what are they going to say? Like, I'm just trying to predict. Like, are they going to re-give this advice that I've already heard them say? Like, I already know what their stance is on this thing. Is that what they're hinting at with this little clickbaity title? And if I think I already know what they're going to say, I don't click. And I think a lot of people do that with their titles and thumbnails, where they think they're being mysterious. Right. But you can tell what they're going to say. Like, does dieting work? That is such a stereotype, that dieting doesn't work, that there's actually a word for it. I can't remember what the word for it is, when the stereotype goes so far that it starts to go the other way. Or like, but what you didn't know about multitasking. Guess what? Everybody knows it by now. Right. That multitasking is usually a bad idea unless you're driving and listening to a podcast. And so I think a lot of people think that they're being intriguing or being mysterious with their title and thumbnails. Yeah. When really, if people can guess what the intrigue is, it doesn't count. So, but when you get really familiar with a creator, even if they are doing that well, you can still start to guess. Right. If they don't, especially if they don't have anything new. So I think a lot of it for me is feeling like they don't have anything new to share. They're just finding new ways of packaging what they've already told me. Yeah, I think that makes sense. Peak fandom for me, like ever on a YouTube channel.
was the Matt's Off-Road Recovery channel.
Oh, really?
I watched that channel religiously for a couple years, and they got up to posting like 3 videos a week. And so it was like a lot of content. I loved the content. I love their team. I still do. I love everything that they're doing. And that's like the one YouTube channel that I've actually bought merchandise from. So
nice.
I even went on a road trip. They're down in southern Utah. We went and we visited their yard.
What do you get to do there?
Well, they sell merch in like a little shop that they have. But then one of their team offered to give us a little tour. And so we got to go see all their off-road recovery vehicles and take pictures with them and stuff. Like, it was really, really cool. I've stopped watching, and I'm sad about it. I'm sad that I've stopped watching their channel. And I still watch some videos occasionally. They just did they call them the off-road games. And this is the second year they've done it. And they actually live streamed the entire thing, or a lot of it. And so I tuned in for that, pieces of that. But I don't watch the majority of their content.
Why, especially if you're sad about it, why do you think that is?
I don't know. I think that maybe it's because there are just other things that are piquing my interest currently. And I have limited time to some extent that I can spend watching or listening to YouTube. Maybe it is just a little bit of viewer fatigue. But even though there is that fatigue, like, I love the brand. Yeah. And so I don't know. It's this very weird place because I love what they're doing. I think their team, like when we went down and met some of their team, they were just so nice. I think their videos are very well done. I don't know, but I don't watch very much anymore. I still wear the t-shirt that I got. I love the t-shirt.
And how frustrating to realize that as a creator of someone can be that big of a fan. Yeah. Where they're like your favorite creator of all time, or at least for a while they were. You have their merch, willing to drive to their yard, like full on fan, and you're still like, I don't really watch anymore.
Yeah, it's a weird thing.
Yeah, makes it scary.
It's weird. It is really weird. Yeah, as a creator, like, what do you do about that? Yeah, and I don't really know what the answer is. I'm like hoping, like, obviously I'm still subscribed to the channel and I'll watch a video here and there, but like I was watching 3 videos a week, which was probably like multiple hours a week of their content, and I just don't right now, and I'm not really sure why. It's been like that for a couple months now, but I'm hoping that it comes back. Yeah. And I don't think it's something they did. I don't even think it's something they should. I don't think there's anything they should change. Because I like I'll see their stuff and I'm like, oh yeah, and I think maybe it's just that fatigue of like, I've watched so much, like almost every one of the videos on their channel over the past, 3 years or whatever. So I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. I don't even know if it's like bad. Like I was, lots of watch time from me, lots of thumbs ups and support and merch and everything. Like
they got something out of it. Yeah. I do think that means something though for maybe how broad of a topic people choose to do on YouTube. Yeah. So you consider that there's people like you that will be that big of fans, and you can't guarantee that any of your fans are going to last forever. Right. And so that cuts down a big portion of however many people you already have. Right. And then there's also the fact that even if you are the biggest channel in your industry and somebody is very into your industry, they might not watch. Right. Like I was, you bring up Matt's Off-Road Recovery reminded me that maybe 2 months ago, I was with my parents and we broke down on this windy road up the mountains, had to get a tow. First had to get a ride to get to cell phone service. It was wild. But got a tow. And the guy was like my age, like 20s, probably maybe early 30s, probably 20s. And he, young enough to watch YouTube, right? And he was talking this whole time about recovering vehicles off like the side of this mountain and how difficult it is and how it's just so fun to him to solve these problems, figure out how to recover the vehicles. Like clearly passionate about his job. Right. In his late 20s. And I'm like, oh, have you ever watched Matt's Off-Road Recovery? Thinking surely he has. Right. And he's like, no. Okay. Wow. That's shocking. Yeah. That's shocking. Yeah. So then like, I don't mean to be like discouraging. Obviously there's still hope on YouTube. It's just wild to realize what you're up against. Yeah. You can be the best in that niche. Hands down. Like Matt's Off-Road Recovery is the biggest in that niche, right? And then they have on one side people like fans like you who you're not into off-road recovery in your personal life.
In my personal life, like at all.
But you love the channel and you still got burnt out. And then there's people like him who like, that's your audience, right? It should be your audience and they're not watching. Maybe he hasn't heard of it. I don't really know. But I just think that's something to consider where people think that their niche is broad enough. Mm-hmm. It isn't always because if you're like, well, there's at least, 100,000 people that are into this topic. Okay. Well, how many of them are never going to watch your channel for some weird reason? Mm-hmm. How many of them are going to be big fans and just not watch forever? That's another thing people talk a lot about is like, well, if people are likely to like outgrow this topic, if it's a topic somebody's only going to be into for a couple of years, like college. Okay. But even if it's not, a lot of people are going to get tired of your content anyways. I don't know. I'm not trying to be negative here. It's just crazy to realize how hard it is.
Yeah. So one other thing that just makes me think that is probably a good thing. Matt's Offer Recovery Channel has done a really good job of expanding their media, right? They do YouTube. They have their Instagram pages and Facebook, videos on Facebook. Like they're kind of all over the place. They do their merchandise and everything. As a fan who watched all their content but doesn't anymore, they still have their hooks in me to some extent. Like I still see all their content on YouTube. I'm still following their stuff on Instagram. I interact with their stuff on Instagram. I wear their t-shirt, like I'm still a part of their brand as an audience member. If they came and they did an event in Boise, I would go. I really like what they're doing. And so even though I'm not an active viewer, and I think that maybe just on the creator side, like it's good to remember, like people are participating with your brand in a lot of levels. Sometimes it's like watch every video, buy the t-shirt, get the stickers, whatever. And sometimes it's not, but that doesn't mean that they're not there. A lot of times when we think of our audience on YouTube, we're thinking about the diehards, right? The people who are just there all the time in our comments, the second our video releases. That makes up the smallest portion of our audience. There are a lot of people in the audience who are probably participating in your brand like I am participating, or maybe even less than what I did with the Matt's Off-Road, where now I'm watching 1 out of 7 videos, or 1 out of 10 videos. Like that's probably pretty normal for people. Most people may go through a time where they watch all your stuff, but then they might not. And I think that's okay. And
I think that if you throw out something new, it's not a guarantee, especially if you're just doing something new to rehook that audience, that might not be the best way to go about it. But like some of my favorite creators, I'm thinking one particular, I really like her podcast. I used to listen to every single week. Now I like more pick and choose based on the topic. And sometimes I forget about her for a while, but she just announced a new book and you better bet that in October, like I already know when it's coming out, right? I'm excited about it. And another creator that I have been following for probably almost 2 decades has just released a new book. And I didn't even notice until it was like, he was sending out the pre-release emails and offering these bonuses. And I was like, I bought the book, even though I probably could have got it from the library. Like I usually get my books, but I wanted the pre-release stuff and I wanted to support him. And so he had like, I think it's kind of the same thing. He hadn't like fallen off my radar. I hadn't forgotten about him.
Right.
I just hadn't been consuming his content, but then, I contributed to his book.
Yeah.
Especially that pre-release stuff is really important. Yeah, they're still there even if they're not watching all the time, I think.
Right. I think that's an interesting way to look at your audience, and it's probably good as creators to remember that.
Yeah.
Because like there are a lot of people watching who are not actively commenting or liking, or in the comments we always see like, oh, there's some good positive comments, or it's easy to focus on just the negative comments, but it's like there are so many more people out there who probably really like what you're doing. But they're just not interacting at that level right now.
Yeah.
But they very well could still be bringing value to you as a creator. So that's a good thing. Okay, I have a question for you.
Yep.
Guilty pleasure channel. And define that however you will.
Okay. Well, I think I have 2.
Okay.
There's one called the Jeff Sanders. No, sorry. It's not. I always type in Jeff Sanders podcast. It's not that. His name is Jeff Sanders. It's called the 5 a.m. Miracle.
Okay.
And I think it's a terrible name because honestly, most of his content is not about waking up at 5 a.m. His first book was like about that. Obviously, he has some content. He's an early riser about that. But so many people like in the reviews of his podcast are like thinking that it's about that. And they're surprised it's not. Or I'll tell people about the podcast and like, oh, I'm never going to wake up at 5 a.m. It's like, okay, most of the podcast is not about that.
Right.
He's just like productivity. He's I'd say he's extremely hardcore about it, but he has a family, like he has a real life as well. He's not just some like bro that's doing the bro stuff all day, right? But I like how sort of seriously he takes productivity, because he'll, when he's focused, like he has a whole routine to get into his focus block of time, and then really big on no interruptions. Like he's really trying to maximize his time and his productivity and his learning and things like that. So I like just how strategic he is. Like, but I guess I thought of him when you said guilty pleasure because his energy is so Tony Robbins. Okay. The content isn't. Because I think of Tony Robbins as very high level motivation. Jeff Sanders will be like, motivation is stupid. He's just like so peppy. I've heard people say he seems kind of fake. And I'm like, I don't think the content is. Maybe his persona is. Anyways. And then there's one more, A Slob Comes Clean. She is so funny. Her name is Dana White, and she just like declutters, and normally I like really efficient podcasts. Like give me the information concisely, and she will go off on a tangent, but she's just so cute and so funny and so down to earth. She is one of the only creators that I felt like really doesn't do anything but be themselves. Yeah. Like I feel like I'm pretty good at spotting it, even when they're trying to act like themselves, but she just is herself, and it's hilarious. She'll be like, I'm recording in my car because my kids are being loud, and then she'll go off on some tangent. She'll like, I'm sorry, we need to get back to the topic, like completely unedited. She's adorable. But she does well. She's got a big following on YouTube. Even her YouTube channel, the production quality is so low. It's probably the most viewed channel I've seen with such a low production quality. Wow. She's just doing like her little handheld phone thing and bad audio. But she sells books, and people just like her. She's just real, and people like her, and she does well. So, that's very What are your guilty pleasures?
Well, mine are probably a little more embarrassing than yours. Oh. I would say what you considered a guilty pleasure would probably be my productivity, like the highest level of productivity.
You're feeling good about yourself on that day.
There is something, again, a little bit embarrassing here, but there's something that draws me to like YouTube prank channels. Oh. And I am embarrassed to admit to anybody that I watch those. And I don't watch them all the time.
Why are you so embarrassed about that? They're funny.
It's such a waste of time.
Yeah.
And like they're kind of all the same. And maybe it's not even, I shouldn't even say prank. It's like I love the ones where they like troll people. There is something that I think is so funny about people getting trolled. And so channels, I don't even know, like I don't know if you've heard of Danny Duncan.
Yep.
His channel's one of them. It's just like pretty stupid content.
Yeah, pretty immature.
Immature. And maybe that's why it's like I don't typically have like a super immature air about me, I don't think. Sometimes. Once you get to know me a little bit more.
I wouldn't compare you to Danny Duncan in any way.
Yeah, like you probably would not see me at one of his live shows, or if he was on tour, like I would not attend. Right. Because I don't want to show up with all the 16-year-old kids that watch him. Like it's that level. Yeah. But sometimes they're just so funny. And I don't know, that's that type of YouTube. That is purely like when people talk about, and I don't want to say his channel's trash. I think he inspires a lot of people. That is maybe one thing that I do see kind of consistently with some of these other channels that do this trolling and prank stuff is they typically have some sort of moral or value that they kind of hold for the youth, I guess. Right. Which is kind of weird because they're like out trolling people doing sort of buffoon type things.
Right. Whenever I watch Dan Duncan, I think like you shouldn't be doing this. Or you shouldn't leave these people alone.
Right. But like a lot of times in his videos, he'll talk about the business that he's doing, like, the entrepreneur type things that, his little ice cream shop that he started.
Does he do any like philanthropy or any?
Yeah, I'm not sure. Recently, he started a podcast with John Ushai, who used to work at YouTube, and now John Ushai is a YouTuber. So him and Danny now have a podcast, which is a very weird crossover. Okay. But yeah, anyway, so like Danny will inspire some. I know there's a lot of that going on. There's some other channels where they'll like tell kids like, don't smoke or, stay in school, like those types of things, which is funny because like I'm done with school. Like those aren't the types of inspirational messages.
You're clearly not their target audience.
It's not, I am not the target audience, but for some reason I enjoy it. That's probably my guilty pleasure on YouTube are that. For a while, again, this one's a little embarrassing. During COVID, my younger brother-in-law had moved away and didn't have any friends, and they were like kind of locked down during COVID. Mm-hmm. And so he really wanted us to game with him. And I've never been much of a gamer, but let me tell you, I definitely became one. For a while there, we played a lot of Fortnite because that was his game of choice.
Nice.
And so he would just call, like after I got off work, he'd call, you guys want to play Fortnite? So we'd play with him. And so for a while, I watched a lot of Fortnite YouTube, and I would just like watch people play. So for probably a good year or two, I watched a lot of Fortnite content. And that was, again, I'm not like the target audience there, I don't think.
Right. Which is interesting from an algorithm standpoint of them trying to figure out who you are.
Yeah.
Or it's like, that's not really who you are. And there's other people that are kind of inconsistent, I'd say, in the topics that they like. But that's got to be really hard for the algorithm to figure out your variety of channels. Like, what's the widest variety that you think would confuse the algorithm with what you like to watch?
Well, I checked. I'm subscribed to 77 channels.
Okay.
And I could just read you a couple of the topics.
Let's do it.
Finance, music. This is like I don't even know how I subscribed to this one. Like some kids cartoon channel, a butcher YouTube channel, a coloring channel, like a shorts reacts channel, crumble cookies. Yeah, you can probably guess what that one's about. A couple gaming channels, like competitive eating channels. I'm like following like 4 professional competitive eaters. I don't know why. Outdoors channels, like it's a pretty wide variety, like Mr. Beast style content. I do also follow your channel and a couple other people here on the team.
Oh, nice.
Watch those every time.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
It's funny to me because based on what you just read off, it does sound, I would say younger than you actually are. But the funniest thing is that your interests to me seem like I would have guessed the opposite. You know, I would have guessed the algorithm probably thinks you're 40, right? Probably. But now after reading that, it's like, oh, maybe not. Maybe they think you're younger than you actually are. Because, and especially with what I'm thinking, like advertising dollars, what kind of products would be advertised to you? Mm-hmm. You're not going to buy the same things that they probably think you're going to buy. Right. Very interesting. I don't know. Maybe with all the cookies and stuff, they can figure out what you actually. Yeah. I don't know. Maybe. I don't know.
What about you? What's your variety?
Oh, I was subscribed to like 72 on YouTube. A lot of podcasts, a lot of motivational stuff. I don't know if I feel guilty about being on the internet, so I'm like, I'm going to make it count. I don't know. I just constantly wish I had more motivation. So I got some decluttering.
So motivation and decluttering. That's the...
Yep. Mm-hmm. A couple sermons, some fitness stuff. Not a lot. I have like a couple channels. I try to keep that to a minimum because I don't want too many different voices. It will confuse me. TED Talks. I've got... Oh, this is funny. Like Art of Manliness. That is one of my favorite channels, especially podcasts. I love Art of Manliness. But then what does the algorithm think when I'm listening? Even my friends are like, what? So I'm listening to Art of Manliness one day, and then the next day some like mom that's talking about decluttering or her skincare routine or a beauty channel. Like they're probably so confused. And I'm sure they are for everybody, right? Like they have, I don't know if they just ignore certain things and just decide what demographic you are, and then if you go out of that, maybe they think, well, somebody else uses your account, or you just watch something slightly out of character. I don't know. I don't know how it works. So yeah, mostly like YouTube strategy. I'd say a lot of productivity stuff and some beauty stuff.
You definitely are giving more mature adult, less
I would say, yes.
Gaming and prank channels.
I would say yes. Yeah. I try not to do as much entertainment, but I get sucked in. And to be honest, it's all entertainment, right? Like, it's all, even the productivity stuff. Like I could actually clean my house instead of watching videos about it.
That is a very interesting thing to look at. Like most everything on YouTube to some extent is entertainment.
Yes.
Because it has to be. That's the only way it works on YouTube. Like the only way that your channel is going to grow and get big is if your channel holds attention. So even for something that has educational elements to it, there's still... If it's not you going and doing the thing yourself in real life, you're utilizing YouTube for entertainment. Yeah. But and I would say that like prank channel versus decluttering, like there's definitely a range there.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is really interesting to think about it. We've had an interesting conversation with some of the members in our community about entertainment on YouTube. And I think that a lot of channels don't implement enough entertaining or engaging elements, especially people just getting started on YouTube. It's not engaging enough. And a lot of people argue, well, I want my channel to be helpful. It's like, okay, yes, your channel should be helpful, but do you want people to watch it? And if you want people to watch it, it needs to be engaging, which is oftentimes entertaining to some extent.
Yes. I find so often, I mean, really a lot, people I don't think they're self-aware enough to realize how entertaining what they're watching is and how likely it is that why they clicked and why they continued to watch is because of the entertainment. And I mean, I'm sure I was there too before I spent every day analyzing YouTube, right? Right. But like I'll hear people say like, oh, I really don't care about like entertainment. I just, I just want things for the practical advice. And so that's who I want my audience to be. Or, oh, I just really like this topic. Like I had a friend say, just really likes watching horses, right? I said, okay, well, show me what you watch. And it was like TV quality, storyline, production. They're like going out to get this wild Mustang and maybe they'll get it and maybe they won't. And not sure where it is, boys. And let's take the truck and music and sound effects. And people don't realize it though, but they're like, well, I just like horses, you know? And so if you don't stop to notice what you're consuming and notice, does it look nice? Are they changing the screen often? I'm not just talking about like that super extreme retention style editing. Yeah. Some people do not like that. Yeah. But even with the lower retention style editing, it can still be very entertaining and very engaging. Let's use the productivity stuff as an example. It could feel very bland. It could be, Jeff Sanders being like, you should focus really hard, right? And then like no visuals, it's just him saying this. But it's pretty scripted. Yeah. He makes some pretty big promises that probably trigger some dopamine in my brain where I'm like, oh, great, this is going to change my life, right? So like it's more than just practical, I think. And it's tricky to realize that.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot that goes into it.
Yeah.
Well, this has been a very interesting conversation.
It has.
I'd be interested to know, anyone who's listening, let us know, like I want to know, like, what do you watch right now and why? Like, kind of back to that question, like, why are you really watching what you're watching? Because I think that a lot can be said about what you're watching. Like, what you're watching on your YouTube channel can tell a lot about a person.
And if you're brave enough, your guilty pleasures.
Yes. Let us know.
Sweet. All right. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you guys next time.